Good afternoon. I'm Marcy Stromgren with Just the Facts, and today we have in the studio Bliss 2. He's the Regional Field Director for the John Birch Society. Welcome, Bliss.
Thank you, Marcy. It's good to be with you.
Nice to have you here today. Many of you may or may not be familiar with the John Birch Society, so I'm going to have Bliss give just a brief overview of what the John Birch Society is all about and what they are currently doing.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. You know, I've been a member of the John Birch Society now for 25 years. I joined as a volunteer back in the beginning of 1991. I was concerned when I was hearing President George Herbert Walker Bush talking about his New World Order, the strengthening of the United Nations. That concerned me a lot. And I saw a billboard on the side of the freeway that said, "Get us out of the UN, stop the New World Order," the John Birch Society, and gave me a phone number. So I called that phone number. That's how I got introduced to the John Birch Society. But what are we? And let me make sure you get my name. It's such a strange name. My first name's Bliss, B-L-I-S-S, and my last name's Tew, T-E-W, like wet backwards. At any rate, the John Birch Society, it turned out when I met with the coordinator for the area, is a very old organization. We were started December 8th and 9th at a meeting in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1958. So we've been around a long, long time. We have a good reputation as an organization that is designed to act as an educational army to educate the public about our Constitution, why government should limit itself on the federal level to those delegated powers within the Constitution, especially Article 1, Section 8, that Congress is supposed to obey. And of course, we're also well known as an anti-communist organization from our very beginning. Our founder, Robert Welch, had us working to expose the Communist International for what its aims were. And another thing we're very well known for, Marcy, is since 1958, we've been trying to protect the sovereignty and independence of the United States by exposing some of the supranational organizations, like the United Nations, as tools of internationalists and globalists and international communists who would like to build a new world order, a world government. I'd just tell you, anybody out there, look up New World Order on YouTube and see what George Herbert Walker Bush had to say about the New World Order. There's quite a few good quotes about that. But anyway, we've been involved in exposing what the New World Order is, an attempt to build global government and submerge the governments of the world under the supranational governmental structures of that government. And other things that we're doing, as I say, we're trying to protect the Constitution. So one of our long-term efforts has been to stop an Article 5 constitutional convention, or some people call it a convention of the states, or an amendments convention, or a con-con. There's a lot of different names that it's known by, but in the Black's Law Dictionary, it's fit right into the definition of a constitutional convention. So anyway, that's what we are. How are we organized? We have a headquarters in Appleton, Wisconsin. We used to be out in Massachusetts, but when our founder, Robert Welch, passed away in 1985, we moved to more of a central location in the United States, and Appleton, Wisconsin is where we landed. And it's a wonderful set of buildings that we have there. We have our magazine, The New American, headquartered there. We have our education institution, the Freedom Project Academy, that's an online education system, grades K through 12, headquartered there. And then our organization, the John Birch Society, has its national headquarters there. All of our websites and everything are managed there, and our customer service and our shopjbs.org bookstore. And so our books, our videos, our DVDs, our reprinted articles and so on are all available from that bookstore, shopjbs.org, or you can go to our website, thenewamerican.com, and find it, or you can go to the website jbs.org And just look for the word shop on there and click on that and you'll get in there. All kinds of books, magazines, DVDs. We also have archived materials online. So if you wanted to look at our old videos from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, it's all there, Marcy. But so what about, how are we organized in the field? We have a National Director of Field Activities, Mr. Jim Fitzgerald. He's a former plainclothes detective from Newark, New Jersey. He spent 8 years on the police force and a lot of years in the U.S. Air Force. And he's probably been on our staff something like 36, 38 years with the John Birch Society. And so reporting to him are regional field directors. I'm one of 2 regional field directors. I have 20 states that are the area in my region. And those include, if I can go through them all, Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and part of Arkansas, and also Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I have a large area that I'm responsible for, and my responsibility is to find and hire and train field coordinators who are staff members in the field that have the duty then over a territory to find and train volunteer section leaders who are leaders over several volunteer chapters. And then our volunteer chapters are located in cities from coast to coast, all over the place. And as an older organization, of course, we've built up a great deal of information now. So part of our big training work is to train our members, have them self-educate with our books, our videos, our magazine, our reprinted articles, and so on the topics that they need to train themselves on so that they're educated before they educate others. And then we do outreach to people like we're doing today with you, Marcy.
Wow.
Does that tell you a little bit about us anyway?
It certainly does. And
All right.
I learned more about you in that than I think I probably have known overall. I believe that I have met, I believe you said Jim?
Jim Fitzgerald?
I believe I've met him at Constitution Party meetings in the past.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've gotten things through him. I'd like to tell you my brief experience with the John Birch Society many, many years ago. And my son is now 48 this year. Mm-hmm. And while living in Washington State with my mother and dad before he was born, on the way from Sequim, Washington to Port Angeles.
I know Sequim and Port
Down
Angeles.
that long hill that you will go over to Port Angeles from Sequim. There's a sign at the bottom of the hill. Get us out of the UN, John Birch Society.
Sure.
Well, I can't tell you how many times my mother would make adverse comments about the John Birch Society. So she implanted a rather negative attitude towards the John Birch Society.
Sure.
But oddly enough, she was a Democrat, and through the years, I tried the Democratic Party, then I went to the Republican Party, and then became a constitutionalist. Well, when I became a Republican, she said, "Shame on you."
Oh.
When I became a constitutionalist, there was no words that could come out of her mouth. What I had turned into.
You'd really become an American who loved the Constitution at that point, right?
Yes, and
All right.
then I met people like Jim through the Constitution Party and learned about the John Birch Society. So that has been my backdoor experience with the John Birch Society. There was a chapter, or there were some meetings here held many years ago, and then they stopped. And I believe they might have been from the people from Wisconsin. I think there was a coordinator over there at the time. And so now there's no meetings up here at all that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And so I hope that in the near future, there will be somebody that will take that role, and we can start having some good meetings in the future, because they were always informative, always.
You know, Marcy, I'm glad you said the things you did, because you bring up so many topics. But I think one is that I think it's good to understand that the John Birch Society is 90% a volunteer organization. And so there's a lot of fluctuations, like you mentioned right now you don't see meetings here in Duluth. And we've had chapters here. Our chapters can come and go. You'll have a chapter leader. He might be a leader for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, who knows. He's a volunteer. But if he dies or he goes into an old folks home or he moves, all of a sudden we don't have a chapter leader in that area. And so, yeah, we can have some fluctuation that way where chapters can come and go. The chapter I belong to in Orem, Utah, where I live, about 40 miles south of Salt Lake City, has been around for probably 40 years. And I was the chapter leader for that chapter for about 7 years, and then there's been 4 or 5 chapter leaders since me that have been chapter leaders of that. And even though I'm a regional field director, I'm still a volunteer for that chapter. And it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun as a member of the John Birch Society. I always have. What we're trying to do, of course, is find truth and share truth. And our magazine's all about that, The New American. People can go on thenewamerican.com and pick up daily articles, and they'll start to see. And where I have fun with that, Marcy, is I like to take those articles and share them to Facebook and start discussions. That can be very enlightening for people and a lot of fun for all of us to have those discussions. And sometimes that information is something very new for people.
Especially when they're not teaching the Constitution
Sure,
in school districts
so many,
at all. I mean, in
there's
public
so little-
schools, they're not.
So little understanding of it. It's, the Constitution isn't very big. Here's a copy right here.
Yes.
Now that's about 1/4 of an inch thick, by what? Maybe 3 by 4 inches. So it's just a little tiny document. And yet so many Americans have never opened this and read it. Very enlightening to read it.
They're not encouraged to either.
No.
Truth is not something that education wants to give our children.
Well, I mentioned earlier that the John Birch Society has been pushing against the United Nations as a would-be incipient world government. And I always carry with me the United Nations Charter and the Constitution. You notice that the UN has made their pocket charter kind of similar to the size here of the United States Constitution. But this is about limiting government to specific delegated duties under the Constitution. This is about creating an unlimited, powerful world government that's all about war. We got 2 really different types of government going on here. This one masquerades a little bit at the beginning of, it starts out, we the peoples, as though, here we the people of the United States. So it makes a little bit of a bow to the U.S. Constitution, but that's a mask and a masquerade. But anyway, so we've looked at the UN Charter for a long time, and one of the things that we find in it is Article 8, which is all about regional arrangements. Well, some of the regional arrangements that we can point to are NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and way back, some of you during the Vietnam War will remember CETO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Both NATO and CETO are regional arrangements that reported directly to who? The United Nations Security Council. And so oftentimes you'll see since 1941, the wars that we engage in as a people, wars like the Gulf War, #1, and the Second Gulf War, wars like the Vietnam War and the war in Korea and so on, are actually undeclared wars. Now, what do I mean by that? Again, come back to the U.S. Constitution. You go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, and it tells you in there that Congress has the power to declare war, not the president. So who declared these wars? Presidents entangled us in these wars, these myriad of wars, without a declaration of war by our Congress, as required by the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Therefore, they are what you would call illegal, undeclared, unconstitutional wars. Now, my own son is in the United States military. He's been in for a long time. He's been to Kuwait. He's been to Iraq. I applaud my son. I applaud the members of our military. The John Birch Society has high respect for the military. Many of our staff members and volunteers have been military men and women. But what we think when we say we support the military is that we support the Constitution and only the constitutional use of our military. We do not support unconstitutional interventionist wars that cost the lives of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen to do nothing that is protective of our country, but might be in the service of building a new world order. So I mentioned earlier to you, Marcy, that when I joined the John Birch Society in 1991, it was because I'd heard President George Herbert Walker Bush promoting his New World Order and saying that that New World Order was the strengthening of the United Nations.
Yes.
And that the reason that we were going to war in the Gulf against Iraq was to build a new world order. I can look up those quotes for you. I've got them on my computer at home. Be glad to share them. That was a turning point for me. I sat there on my couch one night watching the evening news in September 1990 as James Baker III, the Secretary of State to George Herbert Walker Bush, was saying to the people of America and to the soldiers seated before him in Saudi Arabia on the desert floor there in their camouflage outfits, he said to them, and I quote, "You now have the honor to serve the new world order," end quote. When I heard that, I had my little 8-year-old son sleeping next to me on the couch. I called my wife in from the kitchen where she was doing dishes, and I said, "Sharon, that man on TV just told our soldiers, not that they served the Constitution of the United States, which they took an oath to do, but instead he just told them that they served the New World Order. The New World Order. They didn't take an oath to serve any New World Order. So what is the New World Order?" Well, I held up a book for her that I was holding at the time. It was called The Shadows of Power, the Council on Foreign Relations and the American Decline. Do you have one of those, Mark? Okay, I just wondered. It's written by James Perloff, and you can get it from jbs.org. Oh, you do have one. Can I hold that up? Would you bring it over to me? This is the book. This book was written in 1988 by James Perloff, and I was actually reading this book for the third time that night. This was about September 11th, 1990. And when James Baker III came on and announced that our troops served the New World Order, I was on the 14th chapter of this book. And the title of that is right here, On the Threshold of a New World Order. I don't know if you can do a close-up shot on that or not, but On the Threshold of a New World Order. And this is chapter 14. I'll try not to let my hands shake as you come in on that. But of course, this book recognized, and here this book was published in 1988, and this was 1991 when I was watching this. And I told my wife, the New World Order is a euphemism for world government under the United Nations. And that's what our Secretary of State just promoted to our soldiers in the Gulf, is they're going to support this New World Order world government. Well, folks, if you're a patriotic American and you love the Constitution of the United States, and if you love freedom, and if you love independence that came from our Declaration of Independence and from our war for independence that our soldiers fought and our militia from 1775 until its end 8 years later when they defeated the British at Yorktown, then you're not in favor of our sons shedding their blood for a world government that would strip us of our independence, and neither am I. And that's what brought me to the John Birch Society, and I've stayed with them ever since. And I told my wife that night, I don't know what this is going to mean for me tonight, but having seen this, I'm going to look for the company that published this book, and if I like them, I'm going to join them. And that brought me to the John Birch Society, Marcy. But something else, as we're talking about the Constitution right now, I don't know, this is a great opportunity for me to speak publicly about this. I don't know how many Americans have ever read the 5th article of the Constitution, Article 5 here. It's just a little paragraph. It talks about 2 ways that the Constitution can be amended. The first method is for either House of Congress to propose an amendment to the Constitution. And once they propose that amendment, if it's voted through both houses and passes, then it's sent out to the 50 states for ratification. And if 3/4 of the states ratify the amendment, it becomes part of the Constitution. And we have 28 amendments that are part of the Constitution. The first 10 we call the Bill of Rights. And all of you are familiar with that. You know, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Second Amendment, freedom to keep and bear our firearms for our own self-defense and defense of freedom. And on and on. But my point here is that there's a second method within Article 5 for proposing amendments that has never been used in the 228 years that we've lived as a nation under the Constitution. And this second method is a method whereby if 2/3 of the state legislatures pass application resolutions and send them to Congress to apply to Congress to call an Article 5 constitutional convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution, then Congress shall call that convention. Many of you maybe remember from your history classes that in 1787 there was a constitutional convention held in Philadelphia that replaced the Articles of Confederation that our country operated under at that time. And instead this convention wrote a brand new constitution, which, by the way, thank goodness, turned out to be an excellent constitution. But that was sent to the Congress under the Articles of Confederation, and the people in Congress approved it and sent it out to the 13 states for ratification. Under the Articles of Confederation, under the 13th article, it required that 13 of 13 states must approve any amendment proposals or revisions. But lo and behold, inside this new Constitution was a new provision, Marcy. Article 7 provided that if 9 of the 13 states approved this Constitution, it would become the supreme law of the land. And 9 states did approve it, and it did become the supreme law of the land and became our Constitution from then on. Later on, the states they didn't send applications, they sent suggested resolutions to Congress. Congress proposed 12 of those amendment suggestions and approved those 12, sent them out to the states, and the states ratified 10 of them in state conventions, and we had the Bill of Rights. Today, right now, as we sit here, Marcy, there have been enough states apply to Congress for a new Article 5 Constitutional Convention to propose revisions that we are 6 states away right now from having an Article 5 convention that's never been held. And for the John Birch Society that's been studying the Constitution, for decades we have opposed this constitutional convention under Article 5 because we see it as a Pandora's box that has great unpredictability despite what the proponents for it say. There's great unpredictability. And they give us a lot of confusing speculations and assertions that are not always found in the language of Article 5. And I can tell you some of those, but I wanted to get that in as we're talking here, Marcy, because I think that this is a topic right now that's very important to America, but it's not something any candidates for office are talking about. So political parties are not paying much attention to this right now. And yet, I was just in Colorado a week ago and talked to a couple of, maybe 5 or 6 legislators there. And right then and there, they were voting on an application resolution to apply to Congress to call the Article 5 convention so that they could propose a term limits amendment. As if the convention could be kept to one amendment subject. But the truth is, Marcy, that it can't be kept to one amendment subject if the delegates don't choose to keep it there. Once that convention is convened and called by Congress, when they convene, they become an autonomous, deliberative body of delegates that can decide on what amendments they would like to draft or not draft. If they have suggestions from their state legislature, they, under the Article 5 language, may ignore those suggestions and write completely different amendments. Now, Hawaii in 2010 12 passed a resolution in their House of Representatives to apply to Congress for an Article 5 convention, and they suggested 5 amendments in their application resolution. One was to repeal the Second Amendment. Another one was to make Obamacare, all 906 pages of it, by amendment constitutional. In other words, putting that entire 906 pages virtually into the Constitution as part of the Constitution, declaring it constitutional by amendment. And there was another one to get rid of the Electoral College and some other, I've forgotten the other two.
What state was that again?
It was in Hawaii. It was
Hawaii.
House Concurrent Resolution 114, 2012. So look it up on the internet. You'll see what I'm telling you the truth. So, a lot of people poo-poo that, oh, well, there'd never been any danger to the Second Amendment or the First Amendment or the Third or Fourth or Fifth. Well, of course, we already see grave dangers to all of these amendments.
Yes.
Under the operation of outlaw government today, where we have congressmen and presidents that ignore the Constitution, don't comply with it. You've heard a lot of people say, we have an out-of-control government. I think a much better way of saying that is, we have a government that doesn't comply with, that is non-compliant with the Constitution, which is their job description.
And they can swear the oath to the Constitution, lying through their teeth, and never uphold it in any form. I've been aware of this constitutional convention for many years. How long ago was that started?
Well, there's been applications, probably 600 of them over 229 years or so.
So they've been doing it since the very beginning.
Yes, but it has to reach a place where you have 3/4 of the states,
Right.
no, I'm sorry, 2/3 of the states have to apply. So today, that would be 34 states. And typically how Congress has looked at that is they aggregate the applications together based on similar reasons. So if you're applying to Congress for a constitutional convention because you want to propose an amendment that says, let's declare abortion illegal, or you want to have an amendment that repeals the Second Amendment, or whatever reason, they will aggregate those applications together based on the language in their applications. And like you go back to 1913, for instance, Marcy, and there were a bunch of states starting to say, let's propose an amendment to the Constitution that would take away from the legislatures the power to elect U.S. senators. And instead, let's give that power to the people like they do at the House. And they were going to bring on this amendments convention, and Congress said, no, we'll propose that amendment. They did. That became the 17th Amendment. And the legislatures approved it and ratified it and stripped themselves of their power, delegated them by the Constitution to elect U.S. senators so that the Senate of the United States would be made up of ambassadors from the state governments. They stripped themselves of that power.
And who was it that was the president at the time?
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
He was a very,
Well,
I'm not sure what's a good way to describe him, but he was certainly not supporting of the Constitution from my understanding of his.
Well, I would agree with you. I think what we had that year was a very revolutionary year.
Yeah.
That was the year that...
Did he bring the UN in, or was it?
Well, no, but he tried to do the League of Nations.
That's it.
So it was a prior model of global government.
Right.
Woodrow Wilson signed into law, though, the Federal Reserve Act
Yes.
that created a private central bank in America that issues currency. And that has been a complete abrogation of Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution that requires that states use nothing but gold and silver for payment of debt. And so that's what moved us into this city,
The
this situation.
usurpation of gold and silver as the standard, which is, yes, been very detrimental for all these years.
So that's whole other topic we could spend a couple hours on probably. But
why don't we talk about, just briefly, why don't we talk about some of the things that you are doing? I see you have some paperwork with you.
Oh, sure.
And,
okay. Well, I wanted to hold this up. This is a bulletin Members of the John Birch Society receive a bulletin like this 12 times a year, once a month. It's got articles in it, it's got action agenda items, what you can do.
Oh, I see that you have a little rundown on the candidates running for the presidency in there.
Yeah, there's some comments about them. What we don't do is endorse candidates or tell our members who to vote for, what political party to belong to. But we do give them facts about candidates.
About them.
We'll give histories on what they've done in the past, what their votes are, and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So there's a lot that we give in here. Here's some of our DVDs and books and things that are for sale through our system. And then back on the back page are legislative actions, what's going on with different bills, so that instead of just learning about them when they're already passed, instead you know about the bill in time to contact your congressman.
Okay.
To be for or against based on constitutionally based reasoning.
Okay.
Now, the other thing I've got here, this is a reprinted article from our magazine, The New American. This one says the new BBA Con threat.
And that is?
And that's about the Balanced Budget Amendment Constitutional Convention threat. This is the one that we're 6 states away on right now.
Okay.
And these convention applications go clear back to like 1979. So some of these are very old applications, but they've accumulated to that point. And there's a big push for this right now by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. They've got 2,000 members of 50 legislatures in their membership and about 300 corporations that want this. And they've been pushing for this for 30, 40 years now. So this is a reprint. And the reason I brought this in is just to say that one of the things we do as members of the John Birch Society is we pass out reprinted articles to our neighbors, friends, co-workers. We give it out to legislators, to opinion molders like yourself. And I'm going to give this one to you. I'm going to leave this one with you.
Okay.
And this is our way of bringing out information into the public dialogue so that we can change the conversation in the community, bring up topics that maybe political parties don't bring up. Now, I brought something else. I've already shown you one of the books we've published. We've published a lot of books, but I also wanted to show one of our little booklets. So we've got full-size books, but for those who just want to read something short, here's a little tiny book called The John Birch Society, Reality versus Myth. This covers what you were talking about earlier. What are some of the smears against the John Birch Society, and where did they originate? And this particularly points to the Communist Party USA back in 1962 when they published an article in the People's World publication of theirs on the West Coast that said, "Enter from stage right, the John Birch Society." And Marcy, it was a little smear job that said that we were anti-Semitic. And
I remember reading that.
Remember reading about that?
Yes, I do.
Well, there got to be so many articles about that article across America that we were asking somebody to do an investigation of us. And our founder, Robert Welch, was asking that. And finally, a senator in the state Senate in California decided, yeah, let's do an investigation. I can't tell you his name right now. It's so long.
I wonder if it isn't John McMahon.
No, it wasn't. But anyway,
Okay.
He was a Democratic senator
Okay.
in the state Senate, and he started a 2-year investigation of the John Birch Society that completely vindicated us, showed that we were in no way anti-Semitic or anti-government. We were anti-corruption.
Anti-communist.
And we were anti-communist. And so
Yes.
the communists attacked us, and the liberal news media picked that up and spread it all over the country. And
They do a very good job of that,
They did a
don't
good
they?
job of giving us a bad reputation that was undeserved.
Yes.
And so anybody that wants that story, you can order this little book, The John Birch Society, Reality versus Myth. It's 36 pages, won't take you a lunch hour to read it. And you'll get the real story, and you'll know the ring of truth when you read it. And I think you'll want to join the John Birch Society when you read that. And we're glad to have you come in. We're looking for Americans of all walks of life, all races, both sexes. We're open to Americans. Who we don't want in the society is communists, socialists, racists, or anti-Semites. So if you're one of those 4, please stay away. We're not looking for you. Also, we don't want government agent provocateurs in the society. So FBI, BATF, if you're listening, don't send agent provocateurs either. We're not interested.
And that you mean, just so that somebody is not maybe sure what you mean by that?
Well, sometimes government agents will infiltrate an organization to provoke them to do something evil,
Okay,
so that they can be hammered on.
okay.
And of course, we're not welcoming people like that into our organization that want to set us up some way. And so mostly I'm saying that for a joke, but it's true. We're not looking for that kind of infiltration of our organization. But we're all very careful people, and we keep a close watch on each other in our membership to see that if there is somebody that's trying to make suggestions that are out of character of the JBS, that their membership's revoked. Now, what I mean by that is somebody that comes in and says, well, we ought to do some violent militant action like a street riot or something like that. We're going to know that they're an agent provocateur, and we're going to kick them out of membership, because we don't engage in violence. We never have. That's why we're since 1958, we're almost 58 years old as an organization, and so we don't participate in that, never have. Otherwise, we'd have been disbanded.
Well, your main goal is to inform, and
Yes. We're kind of an educational army.
yeah, education is the only way to mindfully fight. I mean,
Yes.
you can do a lot with
Yeah.
words. If
Well-
if you're well informed, you can, and it's amazing what you can set in the mind of another person if you give them the truth.
Yes.
They can always disprove the lies,
Yes.
but it's pretty hard to disprove
the truth. And when you get caught lying about the truth, it's embarrassing. And so some of our enemies have been caught doing that, and they're embarrassed by it.
Well, and not only would they be embarrassed, hopefully, but how can you put faith in someone
Yeah, they lose their
that
credibility.
they lose their credibility, which is, I think, is the best way to get rid of the enemy myself. Is
Sure.
Undermine their credibility
Yes.
and
Well,
you
for
can pretty much
example,
get
there
rid of
was a
them.
member of the Convention of the States Project up in New Hampshire that accused the John Birch Society of financially supporting a legislator's campaign. But the John Birch Society has never financially supported any campaign. We got them to finally apologize for that, for lying about us. It wasn't true. And they lost their credibility because of that. Now, let me just say one other thing here. I'd like to bring up our motto. The John Birch Society's motto is very telling about us, and it goes like this. Less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Now, I'm going to go through that just step by step a little bit. Less government. What do you get out of that? Well, that means we want constitutionally compliant government. The government that acts within the delegated powers that the Constitution tasked them with, and nothing more. So we're not anarchists. We're not against government. We don't want no government. We believe government has a proper role. And that proper role is defined here in the Constitution. So less government, more responsibility. Well, that's not just for the individual. It's also for companies. It's for private organizations. Let's all take more responsibility in our lives for the things that need to be done without running to government to do things for us. There's all kinds of beautiful organizations out there like Red Cross or United Way or whatever organization you want to point to that's doing good works. And we can support those organizations as members of the Society of Americans and accomplish a great deal without running to government to do all the stuff for us that isn't even delegated to them to do. And then finally, with God's help, a better world. We recognize as members of the society, even though we come from many different faiths, you can find Catholics, Mormons, Jews, Episcopalians, Protestants, you name it, Lutherans, whatever, in our ranks. But even though we come from all those religions, we do jointly recognize that there is a God, a creator, who is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence as the author who, as a creator, endowed us with our rights, our unalienable rights such as life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And so we do want a better world under that God. And to do that, we have to be responsible to obey God's commandments and thereby create a better world individually without running to government to task them with doing things like take over charity. Let's us be more charitable. We don't need government to strip wealth from you to give to me, right? Well, anyway, that's kind of what I had to say on that, on our slogan.
And I totally agree, because the more you give government authority over you, the less freedom you enjoy. And that is the problem, that people do not see that they have given up their freedom to a government that is more than willing to take it, and then they will say, in the end, they will say, well, we did this, this, and this for you. You owe this to us by form of more taxation and less freedoms to do those things that you were given. The Constitution is the oldest living document in a free people in the world. I mean, there is no other country that comes close to the age of America with a document that gives the people as much freedom as the Constitution does. And so by not teaching it in the schools, the people have become ignorant, and they have become dependent on government to do those things that they're fighting and chafing against. One minute they're asking for it, and then they're fighting and chafing against, because, well, they want to know every little jot and tittle of my life. Well, how much have you offered up to them? How much have you said, well, take this over for me?
Yes.
So here we are
and
with
you
this situation.
You used an interesting word that Americans don't hear very often anymore, but I think it's one we should go back to. You used the word usurpation, to usurp, which means to steal something, to take a power that wasn't given to you originally. We've seen kings that are usurpers, and we've seen presidents that are usurpers. Dictators that are usurpers. And I want to give an example of that I think every American will be able to understand. There is not a word in the Constitution about educational power being given to Congress or the president or the courts. It's not there. So if it's not there, it's not their power. So what have they done to usurp power over education? Well, back in about 1975, I think it was, the federal government created the United States Department of Education.
Jimmy Carter or before him?
I can't remember now, but I think it probably was around the Jimmy Carter era.
Yep.
And ever since then, the federal government's been trying to grasp power over education and monopolize their power and grip over the education system so that they can determine curriculum, and they can determine, even though there's been laws, literal federal laws passed against that, they've continued with that process. Today, most of you are familiar with Common Core.
Oh, yes.
And Common Core is a federal program where, look, if you want federal monies, you're going to capitulate to this. They pretend that it is a state-driven process, but it is nothing of the kind. The more you look into that, the more you'll know that. And we just put out a new magazine, May the 23rd issue of the New American, all about Common Core and how it's being used as the last step in monopolizing power of the federal government over education in this country. I want to say this to anyone listening. Just remember the National Socialist Workers' Party, the Nazis. They took over education in Germany so that they could make one party the supreme party of the land and teach little children to be the robots of that party. We cannot let the federal government take over education and monopolize power and steal it from the states and the parents.
And let one person, they're currently, from my work against the Common Core, is Pearson Publishing Company has become one of the only publishers of all the materials that are being used, including some of the private Christian schools are using this. We just had an incident here in Duluth. And so the materials that are published by one company, there is no competition. There's no comparison of what is right and what is wrong in there. And then the Bill Gates Foundation, which is funding all this and stands to gain millions more dollars from the pushing of these programs. So the whole thing is it's all controlled by a handful of people. And so education no longer can be individualized within the districts. It's all coming from the federal government to the state to the districts.
Amen, Marcy. The districts and the parents in those districts are losing control of what their children are going to learn. And I think one other thing to say about that usurpation of power, we not only have that textbook example you're talking about, we also have the SAT and the ACT tests that are being written to conform to the Common Core standards.
Right.
And thereby, even homeschoolers are going to have to submit to those Common Core standards if their children are going to be able to get into universities under the SAT and the ACT tests. So you're right. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time left here, and I want to thank you for inviting me here today to visit with you and talk about the John Birch Society. I want to make sure that everybody knows our website, jbs.org, and also our magazine website, like one word, www.thenewamerican.com. You can get articles there that you can share on Facebook, on LinkedIn. You can copy and paste their URL address site into your emails. This is a great magazine to share very enlightening articles with your friends and relatives and neighbors and coworkers and those that you're in organizations with or you go to church with. So please look at our magazine and get to know us a little bit. We do the best we can to tell the truth and find the truth and tell it to you so that you can trust our publications. And we've got a reputation of that. We're very careful because we know the enemies of freedom will otherwise just crucify our magazine articles or whatever. And you don't find that. Mostly our articles and our claims are easy to uphold.
Well, and we have to keep fighting the fight, although it looks pretty dark out there.
Yeah.
We need to continue forward with the truth as hard and as much as we can with whatever avenue we can use. And I appreciate you coming in today,
and a
Bliss.
pleasure being with you.
Nice talking to you and learning so much.
Good.
Thanks for
Marcy.
joining Just the Facts with Bliss True and the John Birch Society. Have a great day.